Yo quiero dar lo más caluroso bienvenida a todos ustedes y primero yo quiero saludar y agradecer a Carlos Andrés Uribe, quien es nuestro director de departamento, y Lina María Roballo, quien es la coordinadora del departamento, por este trabajo tan espectacular, lo que significa la Semana del Departamento. Esta semana, esto ya está convirtiéndose en una tradición, es la tercera edición de la Semana del Departamento y toda la semana tenemos unos eventos absolutamente espectaculares y esperamos que todos ustedes van a gozar todos estos eventos tan importantes. Ustedes tienen la programación, nosotros cada día vamos a enviar también el recorderis. Pues mira, desde ¿qué es una reindustrialización del país? Después, seguir adelante unos temas de lo que en Derecho de la Libre Competencia va a haber un foro gigante, súper importante, como los más importantes quienes hacen Derecho de la Libre Competencia en este país estarán acá con ustedes para conversar. Después seguimos adelante, hay otro foro lo que va a ser sobre temas de sostenibilidad. Hay una cantidad de eventos, una cantidad de buenísimas cosas lo que va a ocurrir esta semana, lo que es la Semana del Departamento. Y me siento muy honrada que podemos iniciar este gran evento, lo que es la Semana del Departamento de Derecho Económico, lo que es la idea de nuestro director, de Carlos Andrés Uribe, y estamos en el departamento pues apoyando esta maravillosa idea y cada edición está convirtiéndose más y más y más interesante y queremos traer a ustedes lo más novedoso, lo más importante en las discusiones de derecho económico. Eso es la semana del Departamento de Derecho Económico. Queremos mostrarnos, queremos que ustedes vayan disfrutando esta cercanía con los profesores y también nuestros invitados. Bueno, el día de hoy yo especialmente quiero agradecer International Law Society. Muchas gracias, Alejandra, por estar con nosotros. Si alguien no sabe, International Law Society Alejandra nos va a contar un poco sobre eso, es una organización de los estudiantes, es absolutamente autogobierno de los mismos estudiantes, significa estas con las cosas chéveres de la facultad, porque bueno, ahí estamos profesores, pero los profesores estamos, ¿qué podemos ayudar? ¿Qué podemos ayudar? Y entonces, si todo lo que ustedes nos dicen, nosotros intentamos estar ahí. Y todo lo que ustedes hacen, yo creo que es una cosa maravillosa. ¿De dónde viene International Law Society? International Law Society viene de una cooperación, lo que empezamos hace más de 8 años, casi 10 años ya, con la Universidad de Cincinnati. Nosotros tenemos en Universidad de Cincinnati Law School, sí hay un International Law Society. Y de ahí empezamos como que los estudiantes pues conversar, mira cómo es eso, cómo funciona, entonces y nació nuestro society. Entonces son cosas hermosas y de verdad yo vivo orgullosísima de ustedes, de los estudiantes quienes sacan este proyecto adelante. Y ahí viene la cooperación. Tenemos esta cooperación con University of Cincinnati Law School, donde tenemos un programa de doble titulación, donde ustedes en los últimos 2 semestres de la carrera pueden ir a Cincinnati y estudiar su LLM. Significa que los últimos 2 semestres de la carrera tú pasas en Cincinnati con unas becas absolutamente espectaculares y 100% eso se reconoce en tu estudio de los últimos 2 semestres de la carrera. Es algo muy interesante. Nosotros ya tenemos un grupo alumni justamente con esos estudiantes de grupo de alumni. Mañana, por idea de Nora, Nora va a ofrecer una cena muy especial a esos estudiantes alumni graduados Javeriana y Cincinnati University. Ahí estamos, empezamos las inscripciones para el año escolar, lo que va a ser 2023-2024. Las inscripciones van a empezar muy probablemente ya en 2022 diciembre. Mañana tenemos una sesión informativa a la 1 de la tarde. También vamos a enviar información. Y bueno, y yo más no quiero hacer es que hablar sobre lo que es nuestro hijo adoptivo del departamento. Y este programa se llama la Maestría en Derecho Económico. Esta Maestría en Derecho Económico Carlos Andrés Uribe, nuestro director de departamento, lo cuidaba por muchos años, llegó con su acreditación de alta calidad y ahorita yo tengo el honor de poder cuidar este programa, lo llaman director del programa. Entonces, bueno, el nombre de la maestría en Derecho Económico también muy bienvenidos. Nosotros estamos en inscripciones, la maestría siempre empieza en enero del año. Entonces, ahí también muy bienvenidos. Si quieren llevar la palabra también a sus conocidos o más adelante, de pronto hacen esta decisión de estudiar con nosotros y también llamar la atención a todos los otros posgrados, especializaciones del departamento en libre competencia, en financiero y en tributario. Entonces, esos somos nosotros, pregrado y posgrado al tiempo y obviamente nuestro departamento apoyando lo que es también el programa doctoral de la facultad. Bueno, ya hablé demasiado. Y ahora quiero presentar a nuestros invitados. Alejandra Zamora. Alejandra está terminando la carrera. Mira, ella es un orgullo para la facultad y un amor y amistad para mí. Y es lo que yo quiero agradecer. Y por todo lo que ella ofrece, por todo lo que ella hace por ustedes. Es una cosa espectacular. Y de verdad, muchas gracias por acoger la idea de International Law Society y estar, digamos, sacando adelante todos estos proyectos con esta buena energía. También yo quiero saludar a Nora Burke. Nora Burke es la directora del programa de LLM en University of Cincinnati Law School, el programa con lo cual nosotros tenemos la doble titulación. Y yo quiero saludar muy especialmente a Christopher Wagner. Christopher Wagner es elected judge en Ohio. Eso significa que es un juez estatal elegido. Es algo especial en el sistema de los Estados Unidos, que hay una clase de jueces elegidos popularmente en los Estados Unidos. Es muy difícil para lograr, es una gran cosa para llegar ahí y para convertirse, uno sabe, juez en los Estados Unidos es un gran reconocimiento adentro de la sociedad de los Estados Unidos y también pues adentro de lo que es la profesión pues de abogacía. Muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros el día de hoy y bueno, vamos a empezar con este foro, lo que es sobre midterm elections en los Estados Unidos. Nosotros pues vamos a hablar acá, obviamente Nora y Chris van a hablar en inglés, pero vamos a ayudar con las traducciones en el momento cuando ustedes quieren hacer preguntas, etcétera, y etcétera. Bueno, quiero preguntar algo. ¿Cómo yo podría poner el Mentimeter? Porque empezamos primero con un ejercicio de 10 segundos, ¿vale? Es el ejercicio de 10 segundos lo que vamos a hacer en este momento y es el ejercicio de 10 segundos. Ya lo van a ver. Entonces, sean tan amables y abren Mentimeter. Mentimeter y sean tan amables, buscan este código 7802-6585. Bueno, adoraciones. Ahí vamos. Y mira, eso es lo que van a contestar, por favor. Sean tan amables. Por favor, mencionar 3 palabras claves que piensan que mueve el voto de los electores en los Estados Unidos. Tú sabes cuando tú mismo vas a votar acá en Colombia, tú tienes tus prioridades. Como mis prioridades, lo que yo quiero ver que haga este congresista en el Congreso son tales cosas. Entonces yo necesito, por favor, ¿qué piensas tú que son las 3 cosas que mueven a los electores cuando tienen que pararse este noviembre en los Estados Unidos para reelegir una gran parte del Congreso? Es a tiempo, también es un medidor de qué piensan sobre su propio gobierno, el presidente y su gobierno, y qué opinan sobre el partido que está en este momento en liderazgo. Obviamente, eligen a los congresistas, pero también hacen una evaluación, es un voto también cualitativo sobre evaluación, lo que piensan sobre Joe Biden y los demócratas. Entonces, ¿qué opinas? ¿Qué tiene 3 preocupaciones, 3 cosas lo que mueve el elector en los Estados Unidos cuando se para ahí? sea demócrata, sea republicano, no importa. Su voto, en ese sentido, no importa. ¿Cuáles son las preocupaciones, lo que tiene en la cabeza? 3 palabras claves, seas tan amable. Estamos esperando los votos. Tenemos en este momento, casi tenemos, ¿cuántos votos tenemos? 12, ok, vamos. No te preocupes, no va a salir con tu nombre que, repito, dijo que, no. Eso va a salir, tú sabes, es de lo de cloud, cuando sale con la letra más grande, lo que más voto tiene, ¿ok? Lo que más veces sale, lo que tú escribes, palabra clave, es lo que te va a salir como letrita más grande. Es todo lo que es absolutamente anónimo, ¿va? ¿Vale? Muchas gracias, estamos esperando. Y yo creo que lo que vamos a hacer es, hacemos todo el foro y al final, vamos a mirarlo. ¿O quieren mirarlo inmediatamente? ¿Cómo prefieren? ¿Al final o inmediatamente? ¿Factor de sorpresa o qué? ¿Ya? Ok, ya. Bueno, está bien, ya. Y después yo me retiro porque yo soy la moderadora y ya estoy hablando demasiado, ¿verdad? Pero yo quisiera... 36, yo creo que ya estamos, ¿verdad? ¿Alguien todavía que necesita? Yo todavía, ¿no? O ya, vamos a mirar. ¿Listos? Bueno, ya, miramos. Ok, wow, hay muchas cosas. Ok, sean tan amables. Ustedes, leamos. Cada uno de ustedes diga como uno lo que está como leyendo ahí. Economía, tenemos economía. ¿Qué más tenemos? Democracia. ¿Qué más? Migración. Ok, ¿qué más? Libertad. So we have economy, democracy, liberty. ¿Qué más? Migration. Ajá. What? Diplomacy. Ok. ¿Qué más? Partido político. Political parties. Ok. What else we have? Ok. Rights. Impuestos. ¿O qué dijimos? Taxes, taxes, ok. ¿Qué más tenemos? Vamos leyendo ahí. Religion. We have religion. We have health. Okay, very interesting. Guns. We have guns. We have also peace. What do we have there? We have the truth. We have patriotism. We have gender politics, motivation, justice, transparency. Okay, so we have quite a few issues there. The merit, employment. Okay, do we have inflation?
Yes.
We have inflation. We have change. Okay. Okay, so we could see that it very frequently we had economy, democracy, ideology, capitalism, rights, liberties, defense, money, free economy or free market. So they are like religion, health. So they were like the very frequent keywords you were saying that the Americans, they think when they are going to go in November and vote. Okay, thank you very much. And after all, okay, now we are going to see about a little bit of a presentation, a very short presentation about midterm, and then questions and questions and questions. Okay, thank you very much.
You can go ahead if you want.
Yes, sir.
Or do you want to start with the question? Whatever you want. You have like a short presentation, or I have a question. Sure. Do we have the slide?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I'm so glad that we started out with this because we're really hoping that today's session will be a conversation. So feel free. We're going to just share a few ideas to get us started. But feel free if you have a question about something we're saying, raise your hand. If you want to add something, please do that. And I heard some of your ideas, Liberty, some things that we might get to it, but I'm really interested to hear what you think as well. So we'll make sure we have time for all of that. And I think that Alejandra has some questions for us specifically prepared. So I think we'll have time for all of that. Okay, so let us just get started with sharing a few ideas to get the conversation started. First of all, we probably should talk about what's at stake in this midterm election. What are the contests that we're actually talking about? Let's start with the fact that there are quite a few governor's races. So governors are the executive leaders of each state. Chris, do you want to say something about the governor's races?
Well, I mean, should we?
Or you go ahead and what do you want to say to get us started about what's at stake and what races are happening this November?
Sure. First off, I apologize. I speak no Spanish. All right. So
I only understand it. That's the tricky thing.
I guess we should start with a midterm election is the election in the middle of a presidential term of office. The Congress is made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The entire House of Representatives is elected every 2 years. So the entire House is up for grabs. The Senate has 100 members, 2 from each state. 1/3 of the membership is up for election every 2 years. And currently the breakdown of the Senate is 50-50. And the presiding officer of the Senate is the vice president who casts the tie-breaking votes. So it is now controlled by the Democrats. So control of the Senate is at hand. Most governors' positions in the states always fall on the midterm. There's other ones that don't, but the majority of them fall during this election. But that being said, not all of these races that we just described are going to be close or contested.
All right, so I apologize. It looks like this slide is probably a little bit difficult to read for those of you out there. It's difficult for me to read from here. But the whole point of some of these slides was just to give you a sense of what races are at stake in November. And like Chris said, there are some key governor's races. So you'll hear about some of that in the media. And then the House of Representatives as well. So right now, the Democrats do have a slim majority.
5 seats.
5 seats in the House. So the question is, can they keep it? And there are enough races, as Chris said, that are truly contested, that are close calls, that we don't really know what's going to happen. Same with the Senate being 50-50 right now. We don't know what the final outcome would be. Conventional wisdom is that during the midterm election goes against the party of the sitting president. Is that true here too? Would you say that's true? So for us, the idea is whichever party is holding office as president. So right now, the Democrats, unless people are really, really happy with the way the world is going, they're going to blame the sitting president and vote against his party in the midterms. That happened during the Obama administration, in the midterm elections. Obama was known for saying afterwards, this is a funny use of an English word, if you haven't heard this before, he said it was a shellacking, was the word he used for how badly the Democrats fared in his midterm election. But it's happened a number of times in history. So that's the context for these midterm elections. The other part of the context, I think, has to do with some of these issues that you've all raised that we should discuss in a little more depth. Do you have any questions about the races that are happening? Okay. The big one that everybody really cares about is the Senate, right? Because we can't pass any legislation at the national level without going through the Senate. Okay. what shall we do next? Shall we talk about some of these issues that you all raised? Well, so I'm going to share a slide that shows some recent polling or surveying that was done of US voters answering the question, what issue that you just answered. What issues are most important as you make your decision in the November election? But before I share the results, let's discuss what you were thinking a little bit. I would love to hear a little bit more about what you were thinking. Which issues do you think are the most important to US voters right now as they make their choice between, even if you think of it just as between the Democratic or the Republican candidates?
I should take my.
Okay.
I don't need it. Oh, no, that way.
Oh, we need the microphone out there? Okay, go for it.
I am mobile and the microphone is up.
Okay. Right here we have one.
You first, and then I go up there. Up the hill.
Well, hi. Well, how I see it from my country, I kind of think the American society as a society that is constantly revolving around the issue of the army and the war. And I mean, as I see it, they see the army as a symbol of the nation, as a symbol of protecting democracy and the status quo of the society, the order in international level. And I think maybe the position of the parties towards the war and the interventions in the other states may be an important point for the Americans to vote against or pro a specific
Okay, so the military.
Yes.
The military. And let me just ask, do you think that people who are concerned about the military are more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate?
Well,
curious.
Well,
Do you have a
I actually now, like in this point of history, I think the Republicans are more like yes, have a position.
Okay, so that would favor the Republicans.
Well,
I'm gonna make a list. We don't have like a place to write, but I'm gonna make a list.
I think those who want the military intervention on other countries would vote for like Ukraine, for example, or like Afghanistan now.
Okay.
I think Democrats are not so in favor of the war as Republicans.
Yeah.
That's like my point of view.
Okay. No, that's I get it. Okay, perfect. Somebody else?
I find it so interesting because when Nora is thinking about military, they could say what in the United States people are thinking that the military families, that the military, and then we think about military from here, and we think about wars.
Yeah, very different. Very right.
So I think it's also interesting to see this difference. I don't know if you want.
I
to
agree.
or
That's very different.
Shall I go on?
Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, keep going. Yeah.
What else do we have?
Moving.
What else do we have?
What else do we have?
Well, I think that for the Americans, it's really important, the economical aspect. So
The economy.
yeah, the economy. So I was thinking all this inflation is the highest in a long time. And I was wondering what's going to happen about that and about what's happening to these countries that really have a close relationship with the United States.
So if for voters who are concerned about the economy and inflation, if that's their number one issue, which do you think that favors, the Republicans or the Democrats? Or is it neutral?
Yeah,
Just curious.
yes.
Not sure. Okay, we'll see. We'll come back to that. Yep.
Bueno, preguntas, estoy acá arriba. Bueno, el grupo acá.
I think right now in this point of history, it's also important the environmental issues, and maybe the Democrats are more in favor of doing some other new policies about it, but that's a big problem because it's like a very bad discussion because like the fossil industry and everything is suffering right now, but also there are many conferences and politics that are trying to get vehicles to reevaluate the fossil industry and all this new technology. So I think it's a big issue right now for some people, maybe not for everyone.
It's particularly a big issue for young people.
I think another big issue that the Americans have is the healthcare system, because for the Americans, it's really complicated to pay the bills.
True.
It's really expensive. And like a lot of leaders like Bernie Sanders have proposed to change it. And I think that it also is a really big issue in the US.
If you're an American voter and your number one issue is healthcare and having more access to affordable healthcare, are you more likely to vote for a Democrat or a Republican?
I think Democrats, because they have like big leaders as Bernie Sanders, that they have these ideas respect to the healthcare system. So I think that it will benefit more Democrats.
Well, I wouldn't say that for every single American, but I think that the overturn of Roe v. Wade is something that has really impacted many women's lives. And I do think that many women right now in the States are, will vote because of that. And I know it's something that's responsibility of the Supreme Court, and I'm aware of that, but I do think even here in Colombia, it has been proven that, denying the access of an abortion, has effects on economy, it has effects on health, but not economy in this sort of like big picture sort of way, but, in the economy of women themselves. It has been proven that, denying the access of abortion really has a consequence in the way women basically develop their lives. So I would say that. And also the impacts that this has on, for example, Black women, Hispanic women. So I do think that right now women are really like conscious of what's at stake because of the overturn.
So you raised several very important issues that are all connected there. One thing I want to point out that I heard you say is that I think you're saying that it will directly result in higher voter turnout, right? People are actually going to vote.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good point. So just so we're consistent, if you're an American voter and your number one issue is the right to reproductive health care, are you more likely to vote for a Democrat or Republican?
Of course, the Democrat.
Okay. I mean, I'm just,
Yeah.
keeping our list here. All right. Any others?
Okay, maybe first the microphone is coming.
Yet, like at last, I think the shootings at schools are something that have like driven the US population a lot. And I think it's not only like for if you're a Republican or a Democrat, it's just it's affecting children. So I think that moves like the masses in a way. So I think that would be very relevant, like guns regulations when like voting. And I think that would favor the Democrats really.
Okay, yeah. But I like your point that it moves the masses. I mean, that I didn't bring these numbers, but there's been a lot of research and a lot of polling shown that it does actually move people, as we would say, on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans. But okay. Who else? We've got a pretty good list here, but if there's any other ideas, I'm happy to hear them. Okay, so now let's take a look. There was just in the month of September, there was a national poll done by National Public Radio, which is considered to be, I'm going to go ahead and say it's a relatively neutral, very well respected source. I mean, former President Trump would say it's a left leaning, but it's pretty neutral. So anyway, it's fairly comprehensive. And let's look at what the respondents said. So this shows a number of the issues that you all raised. Oh, wait, you know what? I heard you say before immigration, but it didn't make it onto our list. I'm going to add it. Okay. When I first looked at this poll, I thought immediately I knew that one of you in this group would tell us something was missing. And the big thing that is missing is the environment. Isn't that interesting? I assume that it's because it's younger voters like you are, but younger voters who are worried about the environment. What do you think, Chris? Why do you think it's missing?
Polls are also, they have an error rate. And first off, it's dependent upon what the people surprise. Young people don't answer their phones when their parents call, right? Is that true? Right? They're not going to answer the phone when a pollster calls, right? So that's been a real problem with our polling for the past 10 years is a segment of the population doesn't get asked questions. So I would say that's one very important thing. Older people at home with their landlines answer these more often.
Your grandparents, right? Okay, so let's take one. I see one other item, one other issue that was on our list that we just made that's not up here. So let's check that off real quick. Military. This is interesting. I'm not sure what to say about it because this is my sort of honest, anecdotal, no research behind it reaction is it's just really not at the top of people's minds right now in the United States. Now, I will say, and then we'll see what Chris has to say. I'm sure there's going to be a few times he's going to disagree with me here today. He's allowed. Now, during when the Russian invasion of Ukraine began, especially I'm specifically saying when it began, there was collective outrage among Americans that any other day of the week, I wasn't even sure watched the news. I mean, we have friends and neighbors who were putting up Ukrainian flags. We have friends and neighbors who were changing their, the lights outside their house, like the lights on their porch by their front door, to yellow and blue. So there was an enormous collective outrage. I'm not really sensing it in the polls, not indicating, right? It's not up there, right? That this is really, as to use Ildeco's language, moving voters in the midterm. What do you think, Chris?
American soldiers have been fighting ever since 2002, after the planes were flown into the World Trade Center, until last year when the last troops came from Afghanistan. On both sides, there is no desire for any military intervention, and there hasn't been for some time. And strangely enough, I think as Americans have always understood the power of nuclear weapons and how much of a threat Russia's possession of nuclear weapons are. So despite the sympathy for the Ukrainian people, there was no appetite whatsoever to engage militarily in Ukraine so as to avoid nuclear confrontation.
Okay, anything else you want to say about that? The military situation?
Well, maybe, I don't know, but we could see, and it's a question, we could see that outrage about the invasion of Ukraine as a reborn of a former enemy, like the Soviet Union, as a reborn of the Cold War, such a traumatic.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good point. He's saying that, and we could look at the outrage over the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a rebirth of the Cold War, a sort of restarting of the Cold War. And the Cold War was I think, pretty traumatic around the world and in the United States. So yeah, you raise an interesting point. Okay, now let's look at the results of this poll. So basically, what's the big thing that this is telling us? What's it telling us? So, okay, so the first, let's just make sure we're all looking at the same thing. The first column of responses is all the voters combined. The second column, of course, the blue, is how Democratic people who identified as Democratic voters ranked their top issues. And then the red column is the Republicans and the green column is the Democrats. I'm sorry, independents. So the two big things, abortion and inflation. And as this poll would suggest, and I think most Americans would have described, that that they are sort of weighing against each other. They are the two big issues. We know these are the things people our friends are talking about. On the inflation issue, it is somehow favoring Republicans, favoring Republican candidates. Why? Because of what we talked about, the fact that at a midterm election, the middle of the presidential term, voters will blame the party of the sitting president for economic problems.
They'll blame him for everything. Do you blame your president for everything? Yeah, there you go. Okay. Same thing.
On the other hand, the abortion issue, which the current version of the abortion issue, or I would say access to reproductive health care, while it's been an issue for a long time, motivating voters, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment. This current version of the issue, what's the word I'm looking for, like the sudden, the important crisis nature of it is new. Just happened this summer because of the Supreme Court decision in the Dobbs case. So of course, if your number one issue is access to reproductive health care, then that's favoring the conventional wisdom, we think, is that that's favoring Democratic candidates right now. So it's almost like the inflation and economy issue is weighing against the access to reproductive health care. Anything else, Chris, that you want to add about this results of this poll altogether? Let's talk about January 6th first before we talk about abortion.
Another issue is concern for democracy in the United States due to for the first time ever, there wasn't a peaceful transfer of power when the new president was sworn in. And so there is an investigation and it has become polarized. So an investigation supported by Democrats and independents, typically opposed by Republicans. And so that is also a key issue as to whether or not there was any criminal wrongdoing, whether or not this will repeat itself. And so it is a concern of other voters. And other polls taken, the issue is more general. It's talking about democracy. And usually the number is higher because amongst supporters of President Trump, there's a belief that there was rampant fraud in the 2020 election. The rampant fraud has not been proven in any court of law. It hasn't been proven. But yet there are concerns about the safety of democracy on both sides, but for different reasons.
Okay. Do you want to talk about January 6th for a minute before we move on to abortion? Because I'm kind of curious what you all think. What did you think when you saw this happening? I mean, I presume some of you saw it on the news. You know, one of the very first people that I texted, I happened to be, I guess because we were working from home, right? I was working, well, the courthouse never closed during COVID, so I was working from home. One of the very first people I texted was Ildiko. I said, turn on the news. it was, I get chills even just sitting here still talking about it. When they were going up the steps, because I started watching when they were just protesting. When they started going up the steps of the Capitol, I can hardly even talk about it. I mean, it is so fundamentally upsetting. And I think those of us, and one of the reasons it's interesting to talk to all of you about it, is those of us who are lawyers or training in law took it particularly personally. So anyway, okay, I'm going to stop because Chris is going to start elbowing me if I could go on and on. What did you think when you saw this happening in the United States? I realize it's very distant for you, right? It's a whole other continent, but still, what did you think?
Actually, I want to say something about it, and it's the fact that our generation may not be that close to this, but we as a country may also relate to that. We have something like not in the same way, but our like legislative place also was attacked once. So it's something that we may also relate to, not in the same way, because it didn't happen like in the same context, but we also had that. So like maybe not specifically our generation, but some of like our parents or grandparents were people who actually felt that more closely to their hearts because they actually lived that before. We also had that like many months ago, but we also had it. And it's something that maybe for us may be relatable just in that way. We also feel this kind of sensation of like maybe kind of astonishment of how is this happening? How is that in a country, this specific place is going to be attacked? And maybe for you, it also has like this extra like part of being from like a political party or people who actually were supporting someone. Because we also had that, but like in a whole different context that happened very differently, but it's something that maybe for us was also relatable and other countries did not have that, but we do. So that may be something important to take into account.
Yeah, no, that is very important, very important. Chris, is there anything you want to say about the January 6th or you've kind of already touched on it? Anything else? Okay. I think one of the most important things that Chris said is that we didn't have a peaceful transition of power. And that is a phrase and a concept that I believe Americans absolutely took for granted. I did, as if we would we would always have a peaceful transition of power. And I still think that the reason that these numbers are so small is because even though what happened on January 6th happened and people saw it on CNN and they're still resting on this idea that they don't want to believe it was that big of a deal, right? So they still rather believe that we don't really have a problem. We have a comfortable democracy. So we'll have to see. Okay. Yes, please.
The questions that I actually wanted to talk about, like the topics I wanted to talk about, was how those things affected like these elections, because the Republicans have started this kind of movement towards like separation from people who actually support Donald Trump, people who may actually not support him at all, or maybe so much. So how is this affecting the midterms elections?
Okay, that is actually, that's a very good point. I'm going to say that I think that is one of the biggest wild cards in this election, are open questions. We don't really know. We don't really know how many Republicans are angry enough about what happened on January 6th that they will actually vote differently. Maybe they just won't vote. It's really hard to change your habit and to vote differently than you have your entire life. We don't really know. Chris, what do you think?
Well, the Republican Party as a political party didn't have the tools in its own rules for someone like Donald Trump. And he came in and changed the direction of the party, and he used a lot of social media and communicated through sympathetic print media and was able to and has been able to get his version of events out. And because he can keep doing that, he still has a support. And the trends have changed. So the people who vote Republican who do not have a college degree overwhelmingly support Donald Trump. Those Republicans that have a college degree do not. Those Republicans who do not have a college degree are in favor for investigations to see whether there was any criminal wrongdoing. But right now there is no tools in the political party to deal with this. And so it goes on. Donald Trump endorsed, we talked about the Senate, and some of these Senate seats may very well stay in the hands of Democrats because Donald Trump endorsed candidates that, well, they're more disliked than liked. And it's hard to win an election when you're disliked. And he supported individuals like that. And so therefore an opportunity may be lost. And so that's another thing going on. And then the FBI got a search warrant, went to his house and found confidential documents. And that gave him a bunch of free media to get his back in the news.
Any questions about that? Anything else, Alejandra, on that? Okay. Yeah.
The system, generally, the college system is very different, and they can produce this type of results, electing someone that doesn't have the majority of the people states, that for the electoral college.
Oh,
has
yeah.
Some kind of majority.
Yeah. It wasn't initially designed like that. It became that way. So after the Civil War, the losing Southern states couldn't vote or send members to Congress or participate in electoral college. But as those states were readmitted back into the Union, the Republican Party added all these very sparsely populated states. And they've been voting Republicans for 120 years. And even though you may have, right, so the state of California has the most people, and it gets, per person, you get less voting power than the state of Wyoming, which is the least populous, or Vermont, or New Hampshire, some of these other states, or Montana. And so that's what skews. And if there is a party leaning on these small states, it impacts the whole matter. So since Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, only one Republican won the majority vote for president. That was George W. Bush in 2004. All other Republicans have lost the majority vote, the total vote, but they won the electoral college. Well, routinely the Democrats win the most votes.
Okay. Should we move on to the abortion issue? Okay. So just the context. And let me show you a picture and see if you're familiar with this phrase. Can you make out what that is? This looks funny when it's blown up, but the phrase is, did the dog catch the car? Have you ever heard that expression, that English expression? Is there now? Okay. All right, here's another version of this. It's a cartoon. See, so it's the dog standing on the side, it says GOP, Grand Old Party, that's the Republican Party. The dog is biting the back of the car that says abortion rights. And the Republicans are saying, I'm outraged, someone leaked this photo of me finally catching it. All right, let me explain. I thought this was a good idea, but let me explain. Maybe it wasn't. All right, for over 50 years, Roe v. Let me think about how to say this. Maybe I'm off track, but I think I can do it. Oh, no. We'll each take a turn. For over 50 years, Roe v. Wade was the law of the land, right? So it protected a right to abortion, at least before the time of viability. So at least in the first half of pregnancy. During this entire, 5 decades, the Republican Party spent a lot of time and energy around advocating to outlaw or restrict abortion. So many voters, we know many voters who considered that their number one issue. So they were always chasing this idea, chasing this goal of restricting or outlawing abortion. A lot of religious reasons behind that. So they chased this goal, chased it all the time. And for some people, I think that very, true religious beliefs behind that, I would say it was also used as a political strategy, because when you have one issue that voters, a certain block of voters, your block of voters really care about, if you're emphasizing that issue and keeping it out front, it gets those voters to the polls to vote for you. So they're chasing this for 50 years. Now, all of a sudden they caught it. The dog caught the car. Now, what happens? You see a dog running down the road chasing a car, right? What happens if it actually catches it? This is not a good result. So the question is, now that the Republicans got what they wanted, restriction that the court said, yeah, sure, you can restrict access to abortion. There's no right to abortion in the Constitution. Now what's going to happen in November? Maybe the dog caught the car. It might not work out well for Republicans.
So this decision started in 1973, and had been revisited numerous times, but it was considered a federal issue. And so states would oftentimes cynically pass laws that they knew were unconstitutional, and a federal judge would strike them down. But what happened is and I guess we should say that President Trump and the Republicans were able to install 3 out of 9 new justices on the US Supreme Court. They revisited this issue, and instead of putting it to 15 weeks before abortion can be outlawed, they said there is no federal right to abortion in the US Constitution, and it goes back to the states. So it did. So in a lot of states, they had laws on the books that a judge found unconstitutional, but they were still there. Some of them are a century old. And all of a sudden, they came back into usage. And what happened in our particular state is we had a 6-week ban automatically, with very few exceptions, and the statute wasn't, as a judge, I can't say any more about the statute, but but anyways, so what happened was there was a 10-year-old girl who was identified as having been raped by, was it an uncle? By an uncle, so it was incest, and she had to go to a different state. And a lot of people said, this isn't true, it's never happened, until the doctor in Indiana said it did happen. And ever since then, the polls started to shift dramatically on this issue. And across the United States, among people registering the votes, it's either 10 to 20% more women registering than men. And the belief is it's entirely based upon this issue. And in the state of Kansas, a state judge where the state Supreme Court found that there was abortion protected by the Kansas Constitution. Every state has its own constitution, and lawyers write those constitutions. So they love to impress people by how they can write and how wonderful their words are. But when all of a sudden judges have to interpret those words have meaning. So there's various things about privacy and equality that are put in state constitutions. And now the question is, is there a right there? Because the US Constitution, United States Constitution, gives individual liberty, but every state can have more liberty. It cannot have less. And so now this becomes a state issue. So in the state of Kansas, the Republicans who held the majority put a referendum to put an amendment in the state constitution to allow abortion to be restricted. There was lots of people spending money on the election. What entity do you think spent the most money in this race? The Roman Catholic Church spent the most amount of money, millions of dollars, on this issue. And the vote lost over 65%. The vote participation was through the roof. It was very, very high. People came in and they struck it down. And ever since then, people have been worried that, in fact, they caught the car and want to pretend like they didn't catch the car. So that is the issue. So now you'll see many lawsuits in different states as we try to wrestle with these issues on a state-by-state basis.
Okay, so let me just make sure everybody got that. Kansas, considered to be a super conservative Republican state. They had basically a referendum just recently. It was like 2 months, within the last 8 weeks. They basically had a referendum on whether or not to be able to restrict abortion rights. And overwhelmingly, voters struck it down. So voters voted in favor of access to reproductive health care in Kansas. This was shocking. Shocking. So this is sort of, I would say, at least in Kansas, the dog caught the car. All right, should we do a very high level summary of what the Dobbs decision, that's the decision that overruled Roe versus Wade? Should we give a high level explanation of the legal framework? Yes, okay. I'm gonna do my take on this, and then we'll let the judge add some details. But my job is to boil it down to its essence, okay? So in the United States, you may or may not already know this, but just bear with me. In the United States, when at the time of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, all those guys, and they were all guys, who got together to write that, what was one of the things that, one of their primary theories or motivations, they didn't want a king. So they divided up all the power in every way that they could think of. We have got the 3 branches of government. Each one has its own power. Each one checks and balances the other. And then, of course, they also divided between the states and the federal government. States, say that differently. The federal government, believe it or not, is actually set up to be limited in its power. The starting idea is that the states can basically create any law they want, as long as that law does not contradict, doesn't go directly against the United States Constitution or some other federal law. So when we had laws passed, when laws are passed in individual states, in this case, we're talking about a law that restricted access to abortion, then someone can challenge that and say this state law is unconstitutional because it violates the United States Constitution. Essentially what happened goes all the way up through the courts. For 50 years, the court said, no. Roe already said that we already said in Roe versus Wade that you can't restrict abortion rights that severely. Well, now this new court, right? Take a look at this because it shows you the red ones were appointed by Republicans, blue ones were appointed by Democratic presidents. All right, so this new court gets a hold of an abortion case. And what was the idea? Well, so the question is, does a law restricting access to abortion in one of the states violate the United States Constitution? So we have to find something in the Constitution, in the United States Constitution. Does the United States Constitution say anything about abortion? Is the word abortion in there? No. Sometimes we associate this with the right to privacy. Is the word privacy in the United States Constitution? No. The closest we get is this word liberty in the 14th Amendment. Okay, so what I'm sharing here is actually, this is a quote from Obergefell v. Hodges. This is the case that proclaimed the right to same-sex marriage. Because in that case, they were also looking at the 14th Amendment and this idea of liberty. So here's what they said. So it says, no state shall, quote, deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And here's how the Obergefell court explained this. They said, the fundamental liberties protected by this clause include most of the rights enumerated, that means like specifically written down, explicitly written down, in the Bill of Rights. In addition, these liberties extend to certain personal choices central to individual dignity and autonomy, including intimate choices that define personal identity and beliefs. So there's a whole series of Supreme Court cases, in addition to Roe, that rely on this word liberty to uphold a sense of a right to something. Griswold v. Connecticut, the right for adults to have access to contraceptives. I mean, I can't even believe we had a Supreme Court case about that, but apparently we did. The other things that are frankly like very awkward to talk about because they involve individual, personal, bodily autonomy and choices. Oh, here's one. Loving v. Virginia, the right to interracial marriage. Of course, right? But our Constitution doesn't say anything about marriage. So states had laws prohibiting individuals from marrying each other if they were not of the same race. Supreme Court said in Loving v. Virginia, that is not constitutional and relied, at least in part, on the 14th Amendment and this idea of liberty. So there are a handful, there are other cases along those same lines. Now, all right, let's talk about Dobbs. So in Dobbs, the Supreme Court said, hang on. Constitution doesn't talk about abortion, never says privacy, never says you can choose, never says you have access, doesn't talk about reproductive health care. Then they even went so far as to say, and something about when you're trying to figure out what liberty means, you have to look at the time the Constitution was written and what those guys really meant. And they didn't believe in that abortion was some kind of fundamental right. So it's not in there. And you can't rely on the 14th Amendment to find it. And so No problem, though. We leave it up to the states. Now, when you're talking about democracy, this idea that the individual states, that's closer to the people, right? So just let them decide. That's kind of the position of the Dobbs court. Now let's see if the judge tells me that I'm wrong. Don't tell me that I'm wrong.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. That's a major point. And I think what is to understand American systems of government is the fact that we have different branches of the government. We have the judiciary, the judges, the legislature, and then the president or the governor, each with their powers. And their powers can go ahead and block the other branches of government. All right. Now, we often say that the branches are equal. Actually, what it is they equally share in the responsibility of governments, because the judicial branch is the best branch by far. All right. I know that for a fact because I'm a judge. So, of course, I could say that. But anyways, so I don't know in Colombia whether people run for Congress in your legislature and they go to the voters and they say, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. It's going to rain bread. Everyone's going to be a millionaire. They're going to take care of all of it. They go to the Capitol. They go in for the first session and nothing gets done. Right? But that's what happens in the United States. It doesn't happen here. All right. Which means as you're young, you should get that job. You should go run for that because you don't have to succeed. This is the best job in the world. And so what happens is when you have delicate problems like about people's intimate relationships, legislatures just can't get it done. So they go and they file lawsuits. And they've been doing it ever since the 14th Amendment, so for over 150 years. And that's how we muddle through our problems. We just say, well, a judge will take care of it. And so off it goes. And so that's kind of setting, it's not just abortion, it's a variety of other issues that we can't get a democratic consensus. And so in the name of liberty, we ask judges to weigh in on it.
So this is the first time all right, so of course we have plenty of examples in our history where the court overturns precedent. Right? I mean, because I think everybody here does already know how much we rely on precedent in our system, right? Judges make law every day. So it's not just the legislatures that are making law. Judges make law. So we rely on precedent tremendously. There are plenty of other examples in our nation's history where we've overturned precedent. For example, in Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that has to do with access to education and so Brown versus Board of Education overturned a prior case called Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy said equal, what's the phrase? Equal? Separate but equal. Yes, you can send African-American children to a separate school from white children. Oh, just make the schools equal. You know, that's fine. Separate but equal, that's okay. Brown versus Board of Education said absolutely not, because the schools weren't equal. And so it gave us the principle of equal access to education. So we have plenty of examples of overturning precedent. But this is the first time that overturning precedent pulled back on individual rights. The other examples I'll have to do with expanding individual rights. So this is pretty shocking. This is pretty earth-shattering. Now, the other thing that's earth-shattering has to do with what I said about this idea of how we define liberty in the 14th Amendment. Because if liberty doesn't include access to reproductive healthcare, does it include gay marriage? Does it include this, what about Loving v. Virginia with interracial marriage? I mean, could those laws be okay? What? So people are pretty, now I will say Justice Alito tried to tell us in the Dobbs decision that abortion's different. Tried to tell us that abortion's different. I was talking to some of my colleagues the other day, who all teach constitutional law, and, they said that, well, yeah, he's trying to say that abortion is different because in abortion as a particular issue involves a second life. But nobody really knows what the court will decide next based on the Dobbs decision. So there are a lot of open questions about this entire concept of liberty in the United States and what it protects. Who has questions? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so I think it is in the Obergefell decision that there's some really, read that one if you haven't read it. There's some language that has to do with the idea that, we have to look at the Constitution in a modern context. And but some of these justices, especially the ones outlined in red, they have stood firm on this idea that you have to take the words exactly as they were written, and that you there's this, and they say you should look at what the original meaning was. Okay, so somebody tell me, and it might be you who wants to tell me what is wrong with that. Is there something wrong with that idea? What else did the framers of the Constitution forget? Would you want to say something? No? What else did, so the framers of the Constitution didn't know that in 20, whatever year it was, 16 or something, Obergefell, that we would want, as a society, we would want to protect gay marriage. Okay, they didn't know. But what else didn't they know? Or who did they forget? Women, did I hear women? Yes, we weren't in the Constitution. So does that mean that under Dobbs, we wouldn't get to vote? Now there's other protections, there's other stuff in the Constitution, but you know what I'm saying. Who else was not considered or not appropriately considered in the Constitution when it was written? Black people, yes, slaves. Okay, so, I mean, maybe we were supposed to be neutral, I'm not sure, but I can't. So I would say, I hope this doesn't stand for the principle that we really turn back the clock and just take everything as Thomas Jefferson thought it should be. I better stop talking. Sorry.
Okay, so now that I think that topic's completely approached, maybe we can talk very quickly because of time about 3 things more. So first of all, we've seen that from these topics that we have talked about, some of them actually have more appeal towards people towards go voting, and some of them actually is the opposite. Maybe people may abstain from voting. So overall, which are the expectations towards that specific, how many people is expected to go voting, if you expect for it to be more, high or less from presidents, other elections or voting, and how do you think that may affect it? How is this going to influence voter turnout?
Voter turnout should be pretty high. It's always higher in a presidential election year than in a midterm. However, in 2018, we had the most votes in a midterm election in 100 years. So we actually anticipate with voter registration that turnout should be very high. It should, what's the total percentage? I don't know. Some people just can't make it to the polls on election day anyways, but it should still be very, very high.
Yeah, that was something that I also wanted to talk about, is the fact that mailing votes, how is that actually working? Because we saw from presidential elections that that was a huge deal. If you were able or not to actually mail your votes, and actually how mailing was approached and everything that happened. How is this going to be managed in these elections? And if that's going to be an issue again after what happened with presidential elections?
So there's lots of different ways to vote, and one is mailing a ballot in. In some states, that's the only way you can vote, is by mail. But President Trump, when he was president, said voting by mail is a steal that's not supported by law. There's been many investigations, and to actually try to steal a vote is too much work, and people don't want to do that. That's too much work. Criminals are usually lazy, and if you're going to do it, you got to do it easy. All right. So it's too much work, but people very much care to make sure that their vote gets counted. So instead of mailing the vote, they'll go drive it to and personally hand it in. So I expect it actually had the opposite effect. And so what happened was sort of a crass political decision on his part, because he knew on election day, his supporters weren't going to mail voters in. So on election day, he did declare he was the winner because they hadn't counted all the other votes yet. And if you look at what happened, that's what happened. So he had a lot of votes tallied on election day, but when all the votes were tallied, he lost. That's why it got political.
We may expect that to happen again, these elections, like to be overcounting and looking at every like actual winner again because of this?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of discussion about it, but there was 50 lawsuits and they lost 49 to 50. So you gotta, when you go in front of a judge, you have to have evidence and the law. And if you don't have it, you're gonna lose. And that's exactly what happened in these cases. But there's social media and, you know, you can spend any lie on the internet if you want to.
So each state has its own laws about voting procedures, which is pretty amazing. But what was the other thing I was going to say about that is that I think also what we saw is that, I mean, the states and the individual counties and the jurisdictions that manage voting in their locality, I mean, they do a really good job. They do a really good job. So I'm not I mean, it could be that in some jurisdiction, there'll be a very close race and we might hear some of these same complaints or strategies, tactics used again, but I don't think it will be a big issue given that we're not in a presidential election.
Next question is related to whether or not, like, how the actual turnout and not the turnout, like the results of the elections may actually affect Latin American communities. And is it going to affect that, like actually affect that? And which are the main topics in which we as a Latin American country may be like more like looking towards those topics because they are maybe the ones who actually affect in a higher amount of like population for Latin Americans who lives in the United States and also Latin Americans who actually eventually want to go there.
There is so much in that. I'm not really sure where to begin. You know, we were talking at lunch about the fact that I've kind of tried to read up on this before, and the Latin vote in the United States, they are considered the most unpredictable, difficult to understand voting bloc. If it is a voting bloc, it's not really a voting bloc in the United States. So I'd say, you know, it depends. Are we talking about people who live in Miami and their family origin was in Cuba? Are we talking about people who live in Texas? Are we talking about people who live in Chicago? You know, you're going to see communities leaning both directions. As far as the issues, I mean, I would turn it back to you and say, which issues are on your mind? Are you thinking about immigration? Are you, or trade, or?
For Latin American countries, like in terms of states, of course, immigration and stuff like that, but for actually population who lives in the country, maybe social security, access towards certain services or certain opportunities, like I know that there's like a high spectrum of things that may be affected, but like the biggest ones, which ones do you think they are?
Amongst Latinos?
I mean, but there's nothing the same about that group.
Yeah, sure.
It's mostly the same of, it was on the list. They care about migration. They care about the economy. They care about the abortion decisions. They care about the same things. They're just a very, it's actually a disservice to lump them, everybody together, because they're just, you know, people in Texas don't like people jumping over the border and crossing their property. So they don't like that any more than anybody else in Texas. So it just, even if they're Latino, right? And then a lot of Latinos that live in Florida are Cubans and Venezuelans, and they're very conservative because of their anti-socialism stance. So some really clever political operative started pushing out Latin American political ads saying that Joe Biden is a communist guerrilla or whatever you want to say. And well, it worked. So.
Okay, and I think that because there is this, again, if we're just really boiling things down, what makes this kind of interesting or complicated is there's this idea, perhaps not 100% accurate, but there's this idea that non-white people vote for Democrats. And white, right, it is not true. It's not necessarily true, especially if you try to analyze the Latino voters, it's all over the map.
Okay, so because of time, last question.
Sorry if I talked too much.
No, it's great. Actually, that was the idea for you to actually talk and explain. And I think the last question would be, which states do you think are the ones we should like keep an eye on? Like these states are going to be decisive.
That would be Arizona and Florida, Georgia, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, New Hampshire. Those are the different states. And those are all considered at some point to be swing states. So they're not solid in one or the other, and they have contested races. And as I said, there are several candidates who are running who were backed by Donald Trump, who are very unpopular. So that's, you know, the kind of things that you really, when you're screening your candidates, you want to make sure a couple of things that like the person hasn't been arrested for beating their wife. I mean, usually, right? I don't know. I mean, is that okay? I don't know. And that's a problem. You would probably think they're not a good candidate because someone's going to bring that up. Trying to think what other issues.
Well, have you heard of Dr. Oz?
Yeah, Dr. Oz.
Dr. Oz.
He's a celebrity media doctor, and he makes stuff up. Well, first off, you don't run for Senate in the state of Pennsylvania if you grew up in New Jersey. You just don't do that. All right. And he did that. And that's a big problem. And anyways, he's not particularly popular. And there's a couple other people like that. And, you know, so we'll see what happens. And overall, the Democratic candidates are more popular amongst the general voters. And so we'll see what happens.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you again so much for being here with us. I think it's like a great opportunity for us to actually listen to you and whatever you have to say, because we also have a pretty different perspective on whatever happens and how the midterms may actually end or not. So thank you so much again for being here with us. I don't know if anyone else have a question or something like that. It's everyone okay? So once again,
Let's just remind folks that tomorrow we will be having an information session at 1 o'clock.
Ya, entonces, muchísimas gracias de verdad por venir y pues muchas gracias Alejandra, muchas gracias a Nora, muchas gracias a Cris. Y entonces, recordemos, mañana a la 1 de la tarde en edificio Gabriel Giraldo, en el edificio de Derecho, bueno, yo sé ciencias políticas también, bueno, en el edificio Gabriel Giraldo, 406. El salón es 406. Tenemos la sesión de informativo sobre doble titulación para la carrera de Derecho con Cincinnati. Y ahora, por favor, yo no voy a mencionar todos los eventos, pero vamos recordando. Hoy empezamos lo que es la semana del Departamento de Derecho Económico y yo quiero mencionar los eventos que vienen mañana y miércoles, porque siguen después los eventos durante toda la semana. Por favor, mañana vamos a tener de 4 a 6 de la tarde un evento absolutamente espectacular en el auditorio Jaime Hoyos, 4 a 6 sobre reindustrialización con Beethoven Herrera. Por favor, nuestros profesores, pero un invitado súper especial es Beethoven Herrera, economista, para este evento. Después seguimos adelante. El 28 de septiembre en el auditorio Pablo VI, retos de la cuarta revolución industrial en el mundo de trabajo. Mira, este encuentro, lo que es entre laboral y pues económico, es algo fabuloso. Y para este mismo día, por favor, acá, Marino Troncoso, donde estamos en este momento, de 6 a 8 de la tarde, tenemos presente y futuro de la política de competencia en Colombia. Y yo quiero pedir el favor al autor intelectual y experto mayor de este tema, quien va a hablar en este foro, ya sabe dónde voy yo. Por favor, queridísimo Carlos Andrés, además nuestro director de departamento y también autor intelectual de esta semana.
Muchas gracias, Cindy. En primer lugar, muchas gracias a ustedes por acompañarnos en esta semana y a ustedes invitarlos, de verdad. Van a encontrar pues, paneles como los que tuvimos hoy durante toda la semana. Espero que sea de su interés y esperamos verlos allá, de verdad. Ahí el digo por todo ese entusiasmo que siempre le mete a todas esas ganas y a ustedes que correspondan a eso también, porque son iniciativas es para ustedes, que vean un poco más de lo tradicional. Casi siempre está ese discurso que en la Facultad de Derecho es que uno aprende mucha teoría, pero pues la práctica, bueno, esos son los puntos de debate donde está qué es lo que está pasando realmente. Entonces, están muy invitados y espero que nos sigan en la semana. Muchas gracias.
If there's anyone out there who is thinking about the double degree with Cincinnati, I do have some brochures and some little souvenirs up here, so feel free to swing by if you're thinking about that.
Acá encuentran todas las cositas. Si quieren ahorita preguntar sobre la doble titulación, también vengan, por favor. Y pues muchas gracias. Muy orgullosos de ustedes como siempre. Muchas gracias por venir.
Un momentito.